again, everyone, for joining us for our second panel of the day, Attracting Sustainable Investment to British Columbia. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, we'll be using the Whova Q&A available at the right or bottom of your video screen. It is now my pleasure to pass the mic over to one of our Platinum sponsors, Sedgwick Strategies, who will introduce our moderator and welcome our panel.
Good morning. I'm Bing Juro, and I'm the president of Sedgwick Strategies, a firm dedicated to helping progressive companies with projects in the industrial, natural resource, and infrastructure sector reach construction and completion. It's my honor to provide a brief introduction for today's Attracting Sustainable Investment to British Columbia panel. Non-technical or subjective risks are now the primary challenges for natural resource and infrastructure projects in Canada. Issues associated with government relations, Indigenous relations, community relations, communications, and regulatory affairs constitute the key challenges projects are facing. In fact, most of the projects that are highlighted at this year's BC Natural Resource Forum face these very same challenges. At Sedgwick, we distinguish ourselves by providing our clients the strategies, tools, and tactics to turn these risks into opportunity. We look at challenges holistically so that with our clients, we can identify and overcome primary barriers to success. Sedgwick was proud to work with Niilo Edwards and the First Nation Major Project Coalition, who is moderating today's panel. The FNMPC is creating real economic reconciliation by advancing opportunities for First Nations to obtain ownership stakes in major projects that are in their territories. They are also the host of the Toward Net Zero by 2050, a conference taking place in April this year, which I'm sure Niilo will talk to you. I also want to mention my good friends, Chris Sankey of the Lac-Willam's Nation and Chief Willie Sellars of the Williams Lake First Nation who are on this panel. It's great to see both of you here today. Over to you, Niilo.
Well, thanks, Bing, for that introduction, and it's great to be joining you this morning from Coast Salish territory, the traditional lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. I'm Niilo Edwards, the Executive Director of the First Nations Major Projects Coalition, and I want to welcome you to today's panel where we will be discussing the issue of attracting sustainable capital to British Columbia. Sustainable investment has taken off globally in the drive to match investment policies up with climate and net zero targets worldwide. In 2021, the Major Projects Coalition held a conference focused on Indigenous sustainable investment, with particular emphasis on ESG investing standards, ESG standing for environmental, social, and governance. Along with the conference, we released a research paper and a top 10 list, providing guidance to investors and governments on the priority criteria as identified by our members to achieve an Indigenous-focused ESG investment standard. Some of these criteria include the fact that there is a need to free up capital sources of competitive capital to support Indigenous equity investment in projects, that projects must fit within Indigenous nations' goals and values, and that there is a need for Indigenous capacity support so that informed business decisions on these projects can be made. Through today's panel, we will explore some of these topics in a localized context as to the preconditions necessary to further support capital investment in British Columbia in a manner that includes Indigenous participation as partners. Much of our conversation will focus on the S and the G of ESG. And so I'm pleased to introduce today's panelists. We have Chief Willie Sellars of the Williams Lake First Nation. Chief Sellars was elected chief in 2018 after serving 10 years on council. Chief Sellars has a background in firefighting, lands and resources, and economic development. Today, he leads one of the most progressive First Nations in the country, and he is also a published author. Chris Sankey, owner of Blackfish Enterprises, a heavy civil construction company. Currently, Chris provides advice, direction, and strategic planning to the energy sector on engagement with communities in British Columbia. He is a former elected councillor from his home community of Lac-Willam's. Chris is also a fellow with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. And finally, Valerie Helbronner, a partner at Torys law firm. Valerie has been at the forefront of development and financing of renewable energy projects across Canada. This includes providing advice to Indigenous communities on projects such as the Watay-Nikiniat Power Project and the Trans Mountain Expansion. Chief Sellars, Chris, Valerie, welcome to our panel. Chief Sellars, I'm gonna start with you on the first question here. Your community of Williams Lake First Nation has a strong reputation of acting in a progressive way, taking advantage of business opportunities while protecting and preserving the priorities of community members. Can you please describe for our audience your community and some of the opportunities that you've undertaken recently, and what values and characteristics do you look for in partners that want to invest with you?
Wait up, everyone. Jechqua, Willie Sellars, Cookbeat to Gekok. Hello, welcome, good morning. I very stoked and excited to be here, part of this panel, and coming from a resource-based economy here in Williams Lake, where we're constantly trying to diversify. We love to think that we are leading a big part of that change in rural British Columbia. We fight and we claw and we really appreciate every single bit of business and revenue that we get from the region, but it does not come easy, and it's coming from part of the province where it is a little bit more challenging for First Nations people. We are a resource-based economy, like I said, mining and forestry. We have a logging arm with Boiling Creek Logging. We harvest around 150,000 cubic meters of timber per year, so we're always fighting for more tenure. We have impact benefit agreements with both major mines in the region. That's Gibraltar, so Taseko, and Mount Poly, which is Imperial. And we understand the importance of what these proponents can do to the economy here in the region. We understand the importance of what those revenue streams can do for the future of our people and the potential careers and opportunities, not only around like jobs, but training and education, and how we can continue to invest those monies into language, culture, and ceremony and tradition revitalization. As I was saying, it's a resource-based economy, but we're always trying to diversify. We're diversifying within Boiling Creek Logging and branching out into silviculture and other opportunities. We have Sugarcane Development Corporation, which has a number of spin-off opportunities, which includes medic services, which includes environmental services, which includes archaeology, which includes sugarcane cannabis, which is kind of what we're being known for and what we're gaining a very cool reputation for because of the progressive approach that we've taken to that industry and how we've been able to continue to thrive in that industry, whether it's on the retail, whether it's on the cultivation, and whether it's pushing the envelope on the tourism component and helping blaze the trail for other First Nations communities to follow suit. We are very progressive here. Legacy that was started by former leadership and former chiefs like Chief Ann Louie, who was a great mentor of mine, Chief Rick Gilbert, Nancy Sandy, Willie Alphonse Jr. You could really go down the list of how blessed we've been with the leaders that we've had in community here for WLFN. I mean, you paired that up with a very supportive and progressive council and the amount of capacity that we've been able to continue to bring on, not only because of our location in the interior and being so close to an urban city, but also because of how we've been able to build this reputation with the things that we're continuing to do. So thank you very much for the question and allowing me to provide some opening comments, and hopefully I gave you enough of a snippet to start us off today. And again, thank you for just the opportunity to be here.
Thanks, Chief Sellars. I'm going to go over to Chris Sankey now. Chris, you've developed a track record as an entrepreneur, and most of your business is located in northern BC. You've got a laundry list of project opportunities in front of you, and you're also in regular contact with outside investors looking to invest in Indigenous-driven projects in British Columbia. Can you give us a flavor of some of the projects you're currently working on? And can you comment on how the investors you're dealing with see the investment climate in British Columbia when it comes to pursuing opportunities with Indigenous businesses?
Thank you, and thank you very much for hosting the event. I appreciate it. I'm calling in from the Coast Tsimshian territory of Lukwalams, Metlakatla. I'm very privileged to be here. So I'm still involved in energy security and food security. One can't go without the other. Without getting into too much detail, I am indirectly involved with international investors that are looking for a community to come together and demonstrate that they are working as one voice. But investors internationally want to see stability. I think it's quite indicative of what we've been able to see these last 3 years. When investors see stability, you're going to see money come to the community. The issue, unfortunately, surrounding situations like CGL that has happened, it does scare investor confidence, and we have to be able to get away from that. We have to be able to demonstrate that we're under one umbrella. I think that investors are more than happy to work with any local community so long as they know which party which party that they're going to be dealing with. I think it's indicative, again, to keep going back to making sure that the First Nations and the governments are all aligned to attract investment to British Columbia. I had mentioned this previously, Niilo, in a discussion when investment groups out of New York are asking about a band council resolution. The tides have changed. And investment globally is looking to Indigenous groups for advice and direction on how best to invest their money. But like anything, smart money will follow smart business and good business sense. And I believe Indigenous groups can demonstrate that to the financial world by coming collectively together, demonstrating good governance, demonstrating a track record to do good business. And the other thing I've also been asked by investment groups is what are Indigenous communities willing to put up? What are they willing to put? What are we willing to put in to the game? What skin are we going to put in? Are we going to put in land? Are we going to put in capital? There are certain risks out there in the investment world. The investment community just wants to know where they stand in terms of partnering with Indigenous groups. I think now more than ever before, I'm seeing more and more Indigenous communities, such as Chief Sellars and Williams Lake Band and so many out there that are demonstrating to big money that we're more than capable of securing and being able to go to the banks with confidence that we're more than capable of taking on major projects, whatever that may be, whether it's in fish, forestry, energy, food security, aquaculture, agriculture. So long as we could demonstrate we have good governance and we have strong financial policy, I really believe that we could show the investment community, both locally, regionally, provincially, and federally, and for that matter, globally, that we could attract big investment. But it's got to be a more of a collaborative approach, if you will.
Thanks, Chris. I think that's a great segue into the question for Valerie. Valerie, you're working in the heart of Canada's finance sector on Bay Street, and you are dealing with investors all the time that are looking to place capital across Canada. And I'm wondering if you can comment on some of the trends you are seeing amongst investors as Canada's finance sector advances more partnerships with Indigenous communities, and what advice are you giving your clients who are looking for these kinds of opportunities?
Sure, absolutely. Well, good morning to some of you. Good afternoon to others. I'm speaking to you today from the sacred and traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg, Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat. I am in Toronto, and I know many of you have been very concerned to see whether or not the Army has been called in because of our recent snowstorm, and I just want to let you know that that's not happened. But all joking aside, I completely agree with the comments both of the chief and also Chris in terms of the role that Indigenous communities are playing in natural resource projects and infrastructure projects. Certainly from where I sit in terms of projects that I'm involved in when I'm acting for investors, I think that in terms of trends, there's just been a real sea change over the last, call it number of years in terms of how investors are seeing the involvement of Indigenous communities. I think it's fair to say certainly that there has been an evolution, and at one stage, investors might not have seen the necessity or the reason for that involvement. I think that is really completely shifted. I think that most, if not all, investors understand the necessity for Indigenous community involvement in natural resource and infrastructure projects that are occurring across this country. But even more, I would say that a number of investors are not just seeing the need for that involvement, but also the opportunity that the involvement of Indigenous communities brings to those types of projects. Opportunity at every single stage of the project, but I would maybe perhaps for this part of our discussion focus on the opportunity at the inception stage, at the idea stage. I'm seeing more and more investors understanding, particularly in a climate like this, where there is a lot of money chasing, in some instances, fewer opportunities. Seeing the opportunity that there is to work with communities on ideas behind a project and working with those communities to get the idea started from the very beginning, to have communities involved with that ideas inception and project feasibility and generation at the very outset, and to have that momentum that comes, I would say, real momentum that comes for projects when you have those Indigenous communities involved at the beginning. So certainly, Niilo, that's a real trend that I'm starting to see in the last few years. So I'll pause there.
Thanks, Valerie. I'm now going to get into a group question that I think dovetails quite nicely with the dialogue so far. And we talked about the private sector having a role here, and investors understanding the needs and interests of Indigenous communities. But what about the role for government? Are there steps that the provincial and federal governments could take to assist Indigenous communities to better position themselves to attract investment and become partners in projects? And Chris, I'm going to offer you the chance here to answer first.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, I think every community and nation has a right to an economy. I think the big push for ESG is massive right now. I think who better to partner than with First Nations, who traditional territory you're going to be seeking to get access to. I really think that Indigenous communities have an opportunity again to demonstrate to the government that we're united front. I think Indigenous communities are getting it. I think the elected body is starting to really collaborate with the hereditary body to show government that we're a united voice. Everyone knows that's not an easy feat to do, and however that may come about is up to that individual community. I think government needs to show the support of each individual community and nation on their quest for prosperity, independence, to become a sovereign nation. And I think we have to also look forward. I believe that we have to get away from looking back at mistakes made. I think we need to learn from them and just move forward collectively. Just like investors, I believe that government is wanting to see if communities are together. I've always said that reconciliation isn't just about us reconciling with government. it's also about reconciling with ourselves and our neighbors and how best we could collaborate. And when government gets to see that we are hands across our communities and nations by working together, collaborating together, and knowing that we may have some disagreements at the table, that's okay. That's what makes us uniquely different. And if government could see that, then I believe they'll fully support any of our quests trying to move forward as a sovereign nation.
Chief Sellars, any comments on the role that provincial or federal governments could play in helping communities attract investment?
I agree with Chris. I mean, they have to support, but they also have to believe in these First Nations communities. I look at WLFN, and one of our slogans that we've had over the past 5 years, over the past 10 years, it's doubt us now. And we always continue to say that because we had this grand vision at one point in time where we're going to have an on-reserve commercial residential development. We were going to get into the cannabis industry. We were going to start these discussions and go through these negotiations with proponents in the nutritional territory. I mean, like I said, it's a challenging political climate here in Williams Lake, and there was always doubt. There was always pushback. The First Nations always just have their hand out, and it created a lot of animosity between First Nation and non-First Nations people in the region. But what we continue to do through hard work from our council, through hard work from our staff, is we continue to make people believers in the region. We did $17 million worth of development last year. We were probably the biggest economic contributor to the region by quite some margin. It's the only development that's happening is on our reserve lands within the territory. And that's something that I could take great pride in as a leader of my community. It's something that I could brag about because our staff is so awesome. But what it's doing is it's changing the game and contributing to that reconciliation discussion so that people are starting to jump on board. But we wouldn't be able to do that without the support of the federal and provincial governments in the form of funding, in the form of holding up our values, and really, helping us find the balance from a First Nations perspective. And that's the thing. We bring major projects or development to our community. It comes with all sorts of questions. How we are addressing the elders' concerns, how we are addressing the progressive minds concerns, how we're addressing the future of our youth and the sustainability of the project or of the development or building or whatever it is. And we have to take all of those things in mind. If we don't have a supportive government behind us, backing us and holding us up and standing beside us at the same time, we're just setting ourselves up to fail. And finding that balance is the biggest part of, and the biggest challenge I've found as a leader, because you're always getting pulled in these different directions. Industry wants to fast track projects in the region, but it doesn't necessarily happen that way. And because we have so much capacity here at WLFN, we're a little bit quicker than most, but sometimes in their eyes, we're not quick enough. And by, mentioning that in those negotiations, hopefully we're opening their eyes up and they're starting to understand and they're starting to believe in what economic reconciliation is for First Nations people in government.
Thanks, Chief. Over to you, Valerie.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear and listen to both comments of the Chief and of Chris. And I think the word that both of you used was capacity. And when you asked the question, Niilo, one of the things that I see is, again, as an emerging trend, if you will, but certainly often when you're talking about natural resource projects or infrastructure projects, they're projects that often impact on more than one Indigenous community's traditional territory. And I think a real area where federal money could go is in capacity around what does that look like when you're talking about projects that affect more than one community. Often, increasingly, we're seeing projects where there's certainly partnerships are of interest to a number of communities, and ownership is of interest to a number of communities. And when you have more than one community joining in on the ownership side of a project, it's certainly possible. You've seen it in a number of really interesting projects that are happening across the country. But it involves time amongst the parties to talk through their different roles, and I think that that's a real opportunity, if you will, for the provincial or federal government to provide funding for those types of projects that involve multiple communities investing in projects.
Thanks, Valerie. Chief Sellars, I'm going to come back to you with another question here. In our earlier conversations, you've described your community and your administration as having a super team to help assess opportunities and make decisions. Interested to know how you went about building this team, and can you comment on how important good governance is at the community level in order to give confidence to your business partners?
I mean, it's an investment. I love the mention of an investment. We have to invest in our communities at the federal and the provincial level, but we also have to invest in our communities at the grassroots or the ground level as well. I mean, our economic development department started with 2 individuals 6, 7, 8 years ago. We had, I don't even know, probably 20 employees back then. Now we have over 80 employees. We have a payroll of over $300,000 per month. We're a massive machine, and people want to come and work for us. We're probably the biggest employer in our community at this moment, but there's all these other opportunities. But I mean, we could continue to grow and bring in non-First Nation talent. Some people use First Nations community as a springboard to get to a more meaningful location. Williams Lake isn't the most ideal spot for people to move to and to even want to come to. So recruitment is hard, and we're trying to change all of that. So, investing in our teams and recruiting talent and then building as much capacity as we can within is what's giving us the credibility that we need in the industry that is all around us. I'll use our cannabis initiative, for example. We hired a master grower out of Toronto. We flew him all the way over here. And now imagine somebody from Toronto who's making big 6-figure money coming all the way over to British Columbia. They Google Williams Lake First Nation, and all sorts of headlines pop up. It doesn't give people peace of mind when they Google Williams Lake, and that's what we're trying to change. Because when we get them in the room, when we start having a chat with them, they immediately realize that we're a community they want to come and work for. We have capacity here, we are credible, and our reputation speaks for ourselves. And that wasn't necessarily the case previously. I mean, it took a lot of convincing to bring talent here and grow our teams. And that's just like every single other First Nation community, especially those more rural communities. I mean, we see it time and time again. People parachute into these First Nation communities, they set something up, and then they leave. I mean, it's not only about recruiting talent, it's about retaining talent. You have to pay them, which is very hard to do. I mean, I talked about the amount our salary is on a monthly basis, and that is not funded by the federal government or by the provincial government. A big portion of that amount of money is funded through own source revenue. We're very blessed here. But not only are we investing into, our staff and building our capacity, we're also investing in our community. How do we find the balance as a First Nation community? We need housing. We need to invest in our culture, our language, and our traditions. We need to provide better services. These are all things that we think about and we continue to improve on, but we're not perfect at. I mean, the goal is to become perfect at it. And I say that we're always talking about, doubt us now, but another one of our slogans is be better. We have to continue that trend upwards. We need to continue to prove to people that we are successful as we are because of not only what we believe in, but what we do and what our actions are. And it's a challenge because elections happen every 4 years and the tide can change. You have to do the best that you can and create those relationships and make sure that you're retaining that talent so that even after I'm gone, our staff is going to continue to be able to move that along and continue that legacy that is left behind in the new legacy moving forward. These things always give me anxiety, of course, because you want to always see that the future is going to be taken care of generation from generation to generation. But politics are tough, and and we always just stay as positive as we can. And honestly, very proud of what we've been able to do today, and really enjoy coming in every single day to continue to do what we do here at WLFN.
Thanks, Chief. Really, really great points there. On this next question, I'm going to switch gears just a little bit. We've talked a lot about the impact of investment on Indigenous communities, but Valerie, I'm going to ask you this question here on related to ESG. Environmental, social, and governance standards are driving the way that the private sector looks at sustainable investment. And when it comes to major project investment, these decisions ultimately have an impact on Indigenous lands. Yet ESG standards themselves have been developed in large part without the direct input of Indigenous communities. Are you seeing a recognition amongst the investors that you deal with to correct their investment screens to include Indigenous interests? And do you have any advice in this area for those who still may be deficient with their investment screens?
It's a great question, Niilo. I mean, certainly, as I think all of us have said, and I would echo that I'm definitely seeing increased understanding and acknowledgement by investors in the importance of Indigenous communities in infrastructure investment and in the investments that they're making. I would say that there's been a confluence of a number of different trends, if you will, over the last couple of years. One of them is certainly around the importance of that Indigenous involvement in projects. I think another is certainly in Canada is the I think the genuine shock that you saw across the country last year with the discovery of unmarked graves, prompting the continued conversation around the importance of reconciliation. And then in corporate Canada, a focus on what is called Action 92 to corporate Canada really mean, and how do corporations sort of breathe life into that. I think another sort of trend that we're seeing or evolution is the implementation of UNDRIP into Canadian laws. And then, as you say, Niilo, there's this sort of conversation around ESG and what does that mean when one talks about Indigenous participation, involvement, and involvement in ESG standards. So I think I'd have to say that a number of investors that I deal with don't necessarily make that connection between ESG and the development of the standards and the rankings with these Indigenous important Indigenous issues and conversations that are going on. But I think increasingly they are, if that's a way to see it. And I see these as being somewhat simplistically sort of almost like various different conversations that are happening, and a lot of them have common elements to them, and certainly a common element to all those conversations is around Indigenous, meaningful Indigenous participation in the economy, economic reconciliation. What does that mean? So while I think there's a lot of room still to go, Niilo, in terms of people understanding how Indigenous matters fits into ESG, which of course is very much on a number of people's minds, I think we're starting to see some progress in that regard. And I'm certainly seeing people even just in this current reporting season focusing on making sure that their ESG reporting has an element around it in terms of Indigenous involvement and what they're doing in that respect. Absolutely lots of room for improvement, but again, I think the trend is in the right direction in that respect.
Thanks, Valerie. I certainly agree with you there. What we're seeing too in our own research is that internationally in markets like London, they are turning their attention to Indigenous issues in Canada and elsewhere, and that's the first time that I've seen that. Chris, I want to go back to you on a relatively substantial issue, um, access to competitive capital, and this is a huge barrier still uh, to development of mainstream participation by Indigenous communities in large-scale projects. And we have things like the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, the Ontario Aboriginal Loan Guarantee Program, but we haven't done anything on this issue in British Columbia. We don't seem to be making any progress. As somebody who's served on elected council and now is very active in business, do you see a way forward on this issue? What can we do? What can government do to improve this?
Well, you're right. I mean, it's really tough to get the kind of capital that's required to look at major energy or any infrastructure for that matter. A couple of things are a deterrent for us to go to the bank. It's one, we don't own any of the lands that are designated to be status lands, which means they're not of value because they're held by the Crown. Unless where there's fee simple lands that the communities have now either bought or has been transferred back over. So it's really tough to get any sort of guarantee from the government. Now, that being said, Alberta and Ontario has really stepped up, and the government themselves has been able to do a backstop loan to the Indigenous groups with respect to those provinces. And it's a guaranteed loan, and I believe the fund for the AOIC is up to $1 billion. Now, the nice thing that I found in working with Alberta and the Alberta government and some of the groups they use to administer that fund, such as the Alberta Legal Council, is that they are open to sharing the opportunity with Indigenous groups on the coast. They would there's nothing more than they would like to see not only a net benefit back to the Indigenous groups in Alberta, but they'll also look to do a collaboration and partnership and work with Indigenous groups on the coast. Or for that matter, anywhere in BC, so long as it shows that it's going to benefit Indigenous groups in Alberta. But the biggest challenge, Niilo, is the fact that, one, we haven't been really a part of any of the policy developments around financial governance pertaining to these policies when they're lending money. But also at the same time, it's really, really, really important to show the banks, show investors that our balance. We have a balanced budget within our governing structure. Our finances need to be in the black. So we got to take some responsibility to make sure that we're going to provide a landing strip for not just the investment to come to the table, but we got to demonstrate a landing strip for industry to come to the table so that we could show them confidence that they could come to us and do business with us and know that their money's going to be secure after a 4-year election or a 2-year election. It's to Chief Sellars' comments. Politics is really tough, and I know that as an elected body for our respective communities, we get beat up a lot by our members, and they always look at us as a arm of the federal government. And believe me, and I'm sure Chief Sellars could attest to this, that there is nothing more than what we want as Indigenous people is to have a sovereign nation, our own sole source revenue, so that we could get away from the INAC system. Now, it's easier said than done, and some communities are very close to making that happen. But there are a lot of communities that rely on funding that come in from the federal government to stay alive and function. But a lot of people don't understand that when that money comes in, by the time it gets to the communities, this is just federal dollars, it's about 10 cents on the dollar. So obviously treaties were promised back in the day. A lot of them weren't fulfilled, if not all of them. But now that's changing, and you're seeing a big change. But I think that in order to get participation from First Nations to be involved in the financing piece, to attract big capital, you have to come to the table and be inclusive in the process of showing and demonstrating to our communities a pathway of how we could get ready to go after big money. You got a lot of really good organizations out there that are looking to do it right and are doing it right. I still think there needs to be more done, and I'm noticing a change. Like I said, I had a hedge fund group out of New York asking about a band council resolution, and it makes me smile because, I mean, a group out of New York that understands that level of local community, a local community process, that tells me that things are changing significantly. But it has to come down to developing a relationship with our communities and the change of our lands. I always try to tell our people, if you got a chance to buy back your land and it's designated fee simple, don't wait on any government or processes to get lands back. If you got the capital, go out and buy it. Fee simple land is the highest value of lands that anyone could own, not just Indigenous, but anyone could own, and try to leverage that and looking and partnering up with the private sector. And to Chief Willie's point, Chief Sellars' point, is that we have to be able to take advantage of individuals like Valerie, individuals from the private sector, and get that expertise and capacity in the door so we can help build capacity, so that when these opportunities come along, when it comes to trying to raise big capital, that you're going to have the knowledge and the know-how of how to go about it, so you can get ready to go after these loans that are going to be required for any sort of project that a community is proposing. Thank you.
I just want to offer Chief Sellars a chance to comment on the issue of access to capital, if you wish, Chief.
Well, for sure. I mean, I really like that. It's up to the First Nation that does have to take responsibility. We can't be sitting there with our hands out. I mean, that's not in our best interests, and it doesn't give us credibility. We need to be able to prove, just like I've been talking about this entire panel. But I mean, it's also on getting creative on how we do it. There's all sorts of cheap money out there for these major projects. As long as we come together with a plan and proper collaboration, I think there's so much opportunity to make things happen. I look at a couple of current collaborations that we have with the province and with the feds and with major industry in the territory here. I mean, it's exciting. I mean, it's exciting what a major project will do for a First Nation community and for an entire region. We were talking to Minister Rankin yesterday. I was actually I was on vacation yesterday. I was phoning him from I was phoning in at the BC Natural Resource Forum, and I had sunny days and beaches behind me, and we're talking about how the political stars can potentially align on some of these things if people will just come together and have the discussion. I mean, that's the most challenging part. Even First Nations people, and talking about overlaps and the impacts on multi territorial boundaries and how First Nations people have to come to get together. There's a responsibility on us as well. I mean, we can't just put our walls up and tell people that we're against anything. I always talk about it here at WFN, and I've presented on it many times about how, we are not against industry at all. We always make informed decisions through a very elaborate community engagement system. But we have industry coming to the table. We make sure that we are educated and we are exhausting every means necessary to try and make sure that we're making the right decision on behalf of our people. And that will never happen if we're not open to having that discussion and sitting down at the table, whether it's sitting across from the table from another First Nation community or sitting across from the table from industry. Because you need to, just like we continue to say, you need to show industry, you need to show big money that you have the credibility to make these decisions and you're going to be supported in those decisions. And that's how you get that big money into our community so that those major projects can happen. You need to make sure that they trust you. So the responsibility, as much as it's on the province and the feds and the funders and industry, it's on us as well.
Thanks, Chief. I'm going to stick with you for a moment longer and go to our first question from the audience, and that is when it comes to capital projects, how do nations manage concerns over overlapping territory?
Well,
You want to
I mean,
try? You want to try that one, Chief?
historically, it gets very tricky very quickly, of course. Talking about major projects in the region, it's definitely a lot cleaner and easier for us to navigate through when it's directly in our traditional territory and nobody else's. Uh, you can expedite the process. You can move the community engagement along. You can bring those investors on board and sign agreements, and things happen fairly quickly and cleaner. And you start looking at overlaps in traditional territories, it gets very challenging very quickly, especially if you have a First Nation community who is opposed. And that's not something that we haven't dealt with here in the territory, uh, but it's something that industry needs to be cognizant of, and just making sure that they have those proper communication guidelines, and they're respecting each of those First Nations communities in their respective territories, because you don't want to, and we've seen it in our territory, where mining proponent comes in, they sign an agreement with one First Nation community, and then they tell everybody else that no, they have the agreement that they need to push this along with the investors. They have First Nation support, and they don't even bother having a chat with us, even though there is overlap there. And that's a challenge. I mean, that's a bit of the old boys thinking, which we have a lot of around here, but it's not something that jives anymore. And that's what industry is slowly starting to realize. And you hear Chris talking about, uh, people from New York talking about VCRs and understanding the politics of what it takes to have a successful project in Canada nowadays. And that's one of those things. You need to make sure those communication lines are open, that the dialogue is happening, because if you don't, it's going to be dead in the water out of the gate. And I don't have a perfect answer how to deal with overlaps. I mean, we're more than willing, and we've continued to communicate this out to our region here. If there is an overlap issue, neighboring First Nation communities can come to the table and we can have a chat about it. We love sitting down and hammering things out over a boardroom table, or in an office setting, or even over Zoom or Skype or Blue Jeans or whatever it may be. Because that's how business gets done. It doesn't get done by putting press releases out opposing projects and then not even bothering picking up the phone and having a chat about how we can address any concerns or any issues, and get to the bottom of it.
Thanks. Chris, would you like to expand on anything there?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's overlap is not easy feat. Not even Barack Obama could come in and come in and collaborate the discussions around overlap. It's a very sensitive issue, because the land in question, when it comes to overlap, a lot of the names that are held by individuals within our communities, the land is usually the name is what holds the land. So one of the things that we decided to do over this last couple of years, which I'm really happy to be a part of, is that we started the All Tsimshian leadership table to look at traditional knowledge, common interest, political risk, and the path forward. And my hope and aspirations are that the leaders at the table there will be able to solve their differences collectively. And I like what I'm seeing so far. I think there's going to be some, like any table, there's going to be some tough discussions. There going to be some sensitive issues, but I'm a big fan of getting those tough and the most difficult questions and concerns on the table first. I think if you could solve your differences in overlap, and whether you agreed or disagree, whether you disagree to agree, I think you'll see the opportunity for investment coming to the table when a nation or community is demonstrating a collaborative approach, regardless of your differences. Because investment wants to see stability, and I'll keep repeating that. Regardless of what we have a rich culture. We have a rich language. We have rich tradition. At the end of the day, money wants to see stability. It would be no different than when you're going to a bank to try and get a loan for your house for the very first time. All those things need to align for you to be able to attract a bank wanting to do business with you. It's something that's that straightforward. But overlap it's tough. But I'm hopeful. Like every other community, like Chief Sellars, I'm hopeful that our communities will see that we are stronger together when we could sit down together, solve our differences, move forward collectively, and start bringing the wealth that our communities deserve.
I think we've got time for one more audience question, and this question is not directed at anyone in particular, so I'll open it up for anyone who wants to comment. Is there any panel member aware of Indigenous groups and government demonstrating to investors what is required to operate in various nations' territory, so the investors actually understand what needs to be considered when operating in various communities? I think that's a great question.
It is a great question. I mean, the thing is every single territory is different. You look at the Wass and Squamish Tsleil-Waututh in the south, or Williams Lake First Nation, Caribou region here. Each sector is different, and it's almost like a project by project or region by region approach. Because although we may be supportive here at WLFN for a project, if we go, an hour from town, I mean, they might not be. And I mean, you could give advice and best practices, but it's all about looking at that specific project and approaching the local First Nations to see where they're at. And again, I mean, we have to invest in these communities. Industry has to invest in these communities and help them build capacity and be happy and be proud of the legacy that they're leaving behind once that project is done. One of our biggest economic drivers here at WLFN, which really kicked us off, we talked about hiring economic development staff. We talked about, building up our team in a number of different ways. We had a $50 million highway four-laning project that went through IR1 here at WLFN. We were able to put together over a $10 million package of benefits to our community, which included, $2 million in wages to band members, training opportunities, direct award opportunities, land envelope, project contribution envelope. All of these things are something that we take great pride in and are very happy with how the province approached it, Ministry of Transportation, because that legacy is something we can continue to brag about, and it really kicked off our, economic development initiatives and really opened up our community's eyes of the benefits of what major projects can do. And after that project was done and gone, we have a ton of individuals that have successful careers because of it, not to mention what it did to our economic development department and how it kicked that off as well. So that's something, when we talk about, investing in our communities, I really do love that comment. I think it was Valerie who said it. Maybe it was Chris. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit mixed up here. But I mean, that's something that every single investor has to keep in mind when they're trying to engage with First Nation communities across the board in their respective territories.
We are... go ahead, Valerie.
No, I was just going to add to what the chief was saying. I'm sure probably Chris would echo this as well, but just that I'm seeing increasingly a number of communities that have, developed protocols in terms of how they would like to be engaged and consulted by non-Indigenous communities. So that's certainly a starting point. But I mean, I would just obviously echo to the extent it's appropriate for me to do so, Chief, but to echo what the chief said, that there is no playbook, and that just is it should be, in a certain sense, is somewhat understandable. I mean, each project is specific. Each community at any given point in time is specific. It's very contextual. And so it's just important to make that reach out and make that connection and just start the dialogue. And I think the good news, I would say, is most of these projects, they take a long time to go from feasibility stage through to in service and then operation. So there is that time to have that dialogue, provided you begin that dialogue early on, is what I would say.
We are out of time here, folks, and I want to thank our panelists for their time, for the engaging discussion. And I also want to invite the audience that's listening to take a look at the FNMPC Toward Net Zero conference that is taking place April 25th, 26th in Vancouver at the Westin Bayshore. It is also going to be broadcast online in a hybrid format, so we hope to see you there. And thanks everybody for your time today. It was a pleasure to do this with you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Hope everybody stays well. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much, Niilo. We are really looking forward to the First Nations Major Project Coalition's Net Zero by 2050 conference this coming April in Vancouver. Next in the schedule, we're moving into our networking break sponsored by Pinnacle, part of DRAX, from 12:15 to 1:30. We invite you to join the participating sponsors and exhibitors in their virtual networking rooms.